everyone, and welcome to Coffee and Communications. I'm your host, Mark Johnson, founder of SEEK Strategies. I'm delighted to be able to welcome Jacinta Lim as our guest today. She is one of the co-founders of SEEK Sophie, a travel platform that gives travelers an alternative to the cumbersome process of going door to door to compare prices. Is that a fair description, Jacinta?
It's not a very sexy description.
We're going to come to that.
But yeah, in a nutshell, it's a platform for adventurous travel experiences.
Okay, excellent. So, however, I will say as a fan of the platform that this only explains half of what makes SEEK Sophie unique. So first off, Jacinta, how are you? Busy?
Yeah, it's been busy the whole time through COVID, but I think right now things are really picking up, so it's getting even busier. And it's quite exciting because you're finally able to plan ahead, whereas last year everything was just kind of in limbo. So now it's a good busy, I think.
That's really good to hear. And one of the reasons I am delighted to have Jacinta here is that there is much to discuss and unpick about the travel industry, considering, as Jacinta mentioned, all that's happened in the last year, and also kind of talking about the communications aspect. So, however, before we do, myself, as I'm sure with some of our listeners, would like to know a little bit more about where this all started. What led you, with your co-founder, to launch a travel startup?
So this was about 3 years ago. Lena and I met at business school, and we're both avid travelers, but we didn't like going to the more touristy places. So we'd always kind of talk about where we love traveling. So we both came back from Kenya, and we both lived there. And you know, she loves like going to Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and I love going to Uganda, Rwanda. So we just talked about what kind of travel we like, just finding more off the beaten track, more adventurous type of travel, and how this wasn't available online, and how that was quite ridiculous because, you're in this day and age, right? That was 3 years ago, so 2018. You still have to go on the ground to those places, go door to door to find, say, a safari guide or a hiking guide, or you could just go online and book something really touristy and something really overpriced. So we just thought, why don't we just connect the guides on the ground that really want business, and they're amazing, they're authentic, they're passionate about what they do, and they have local pricing. And you connect these amazing guides who would really benefit from the business to travelers who are all searching for them and could deal with being able to book this online, in a much more convenient way. And it's a win-win, right? So that's the kind of platform that we wanted to see exist. So we just thought, let's just build this, something that would benefit both travelers and the locals in these communities.
So why do you think that never existed before?
It's quite a pain, right? To get online is quite a pain for a lot of these guides because they're small mom and pop shops. They have like one guy or two people. And they'll much rather be hiking up a mountain, and they'll much rather be diving in the seas. They don't want to be manning the admin. They don't know how to get online. They don't have the resources to build a website. All of that in a lot of places, it's just too much admin, and it's not accessible because it takes too much resources. So from the guide's perspective, I completely get it. And that's why how we actually started is we actually go on the ground, and we go through the door-to-door process, knock on doors and tell these guides, we'll get you on our platform. You don't need to do anything. You just do the stuff that you really love, which is, go on a hike, a safari, a dive, and we'll handle all the rest of the digital side for you.
Interesting. And kind of at the beginning, what surprised you most about, I suppose, two parts of this. What surprised you most about that particular scenario and how to handle kind of going out there, working with these guides and getting them on the platform, and also more generally about kind of running your own startup?
I guess approaching the guides in the first place, it wasn't super surprising. I mean, nobody wanted to list at first because we didn't have a platform, because we were still building it. But it's kind of a chicken egg thing, right? You need to get the guides to list on the platform. But if you're building something that has nothing on it, you don't have a platform. So when we first went out, we just went out with a prototype, like I don't know, like a PowerPoint screenshot or something, and we said, look, you guys could be on this cool thing that doesn't exist yet. So that wasn't super surprising, but nobody really wanted to list. It got a lot easier as time went past. I guess when you first start a business, there's loads of elements that surprise you, right? And that's why you start in the first place, because you want to learn stuff about yourself, and you want to learn stuff about building things. So from the building things perspective, obviously we were very naive. Like, all our projections are not, true. Like, you don't know how much you're going to sell. You don't know how much you don't know who you're going to sell it to. And it's a travel platform, which is a ridiculously difficult platform to start, because you're basically marketing to travelers and you don't know where they're going to next. You don't know how to market to them. You don't know who they are, where they are, in what country. And you're also, competing against very big boys like Airbnb and Booking.com. So I think the whole thing about, and we're gonna start a travel platform and it's gonna be super successful, like that's a very naive kind of thing to start off. And then you start and you're like, I know why people don't do this, because it's really difficult, because you have no idea where your target audience is, and you need to spend a lot of money to try to get them.
When was it apparent that if you're going to get to even minimal viable product, if you're even going to get to a point where you feel like it's rolling forward, like this is going to take a lot of work because it is such a difficult industry to begin a startup in? So
when did we think there was actually going to be a thing?
Yeah, kind of like just, okay, this is going to be hard work, but we can see a route through this.
I think it's just stubbornness, right? It's just you need to be very, very stubborn. And I think that's the thing about hope. Like, I see hope. So I also learned the definition of hope. Hope is uncalcified optimism. It's so fragile, and you kind of cling on to that hope, and everything is like a sign, like an omen. So you're like, oh wow, we have, 10 followers, and we have like 5 likes, and oh my gosh, someone likes our content, so let's keep going for those 10 guys. And then we have like 2 orders a week, so then we must be doing something right. So, let's keep going for like the next 4 orders. So I think you just need to be very dogged and like kind of cling on to the signs.
So in terms of like you and your co-founder, obviously Lena's not on today, so you can say anything you want, but like, what did you learn about each other and kind of working together at the start?
I learned that Lena's probably the best co-founder I can possibly find, and that's because I think she was basically traveling for about 9 or 10 months the first year that we started, and she was not traveling in style because we had no money. We built in the first year of the startup, we spent about 12 grand, and that includes all the travels, that includes getting the tech product up, everything. So we spent like 12 grand of our own money, and so that means that when she was traveling, she was living in really horrible conditions, like $1 a day hostels sort of thing. And she never complains, very, very dogged, and I think that's what I saw in her. But I think that's what really impressed me. And during this COVID period, which is like honestly one of the most difficult periods, it's that really comes through, right? You want somebody who's like, I'm not going to give up, and I'm going to like push through in the most difficult circumstances.
And that's kind of a very nice segue to talking a little bit about COVID. I think it's interesting because it's like, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but we're still obviously in the middle of a pandemic, and it's affected a lot of industries. But I mean, as a startup and a travel startup, sort of talk us through how that affected, and then what were the genesis of maybe pivoting and kind of changing and looking at things in a different way. It's a huge question.
That's like 60 questions in one.
I know. Well, this is now your platform for the next 10 minutes to tell us.
So I guess back to the mission, right? I think our tagline as a company, which I didn't talk about, was travel that makes life better. And that's better for travelers, better for local communities, and better for the planet. And the whole mission is that if we connect locals to these amazing, passionate guides in local communities, the money spreads out to local communities, and then that can have a trickle-on effect. So, for example, we'll work with guides in Borneo who will only hire ex-poachers because they realize when they hire one person that used to poach, the entire community stops poaching, because this one guy will say, look, Dad, you need to stop hunting the deer, you need to stop hunting the elephants, because this is my livelihood. And his dad will stop poaching, his uncle will stop poaching, and that's how the entire communities will work together because of tourism. So the whole point about why we started was that we really believe that travel is a very powerful force to effect changes in local communities. And with COVID, that everything got kind of destroyed, right? So we started in 2018. 2019, we grew 9 times. And it was at the point in February we had the best month ever, and we're like, okay, we've got this. We know what we're doing now. We finally figured this out. We can grow even further now. And 13th of March, everything locked down. 13th of March was the day that everything locked down. All our markets closed. And the people that suffered the most are the local communities out of all of this. That's tourism is their only livelihood. There are no other jobs in a lot of these forests, in a lot of these national parks. So you basically need to face the fact that everything that you built has basically come crashing down, because the post-COVID world will never be like the pre-COVID world. And then your entire mission has basically evaporated because the people that we set out to help are suffering the most out of all of this. So that was the biggest thing, grappling with the loss of our mission, and you basically lose the company, right? So that was a lot of grief. So I think the first couple of weeks after all the lockdowns was basically grief. You cannot believe that this has happened. You can't believe that you got to a point where you finally found your feet. And it's not easy, right? The first year and a half of finding your feet, it's really not easy. You finally found it, and then everything kind of gets swept up.
When do you think, that's something very unique about when you decide because of your passion to start a mission-driven company that both is a service, a platform, but also is trying to kind of have positive impact in society, that something like COVID, a pandemic, kind of hits you twice, basically. You are both the thing that you care about and also your own company are hit, and you kind of got to grapple with that kind of duality of those two things at the same time.
Yeah, exactly, because you're losing something very tangible, which is your company, but you're also dealing with the biggest test of your mission, right? And what I've always said about COVID is that there's a lot of pain, and the question is just who bears the pain. The pain has always passed somewhere, and in our case it was the travelers were feeling the pain because they can't go on these trips that they booked, right? If you're from Europe and you've booked your dream holiday to Komodo, you can't go anymore. It's not your fault, and you spent quite a lot of money on that trip and you want your money back. But then on the other hand, you have suppliers that have prepaid for these trips, right? They paid for the boats, they paid for the staff. They can't get their money back in a lot of these cases as well. So who bears the pain? At the end of the day, you have the travelers on one side and you have the suppliers on the other side. And we just saw it as, okay, this is the biggest test of our mission. We say we are here to make life better. We have this social mission. We're here to help travelers and we're here to help suppliers. And if both sides are suffering, who takes on the pain? So on a very tangible level, I guess we decided to take that on as well, because it's not the travelers' fault and the suppliers really don't have the money to pay back. So what we did was, we took on loans ourselves, and we basically we gave the travelers the money back, and we told the suppliers, don't worry about it, hold it for credit, hold it as credit for us, and we will send you people when all of this is over, so at least they have money to tide them through. So there's a loss of mission and there's loss of company, but on a very tangible level, it was like we grew 9 times in 2019, and all that growth turned into cancellations. So everything turned negative, and we just had to dig in our pockets and fund that all, which was on a very tangible level, very painful.
One of the hardest things, I suppose, for your industry especially is there's a lot of false starts, and maybe less so where we're in Singapore. And I mean, it's been fairly clear after a bit of a murky start, but it's been fairly clear the trajectory, the numbers, but also kind of what's going to be happening within the country, what we can expect. I think especially at the start, there was a lot of false dawn, a lot of maybe we can open at this point and maybe we can do that. At what point did you have to make a decision that we can't wait or rely on government or kind of like decisions that are just going to be kind of changed twice a week because they don't really know how the pandemic's going, and had to start thinking proactively about, okay, what does this mean for us in order to be able to sustain our business?
So in March, when everything shut down, the first thing I did was to send an email out to my staff, and I said, look guys, I will commit to not cutting salaries, not letting people go for a year. I'll make sure that we have enough money for a year, and that's what we also took loans out to do. So we always knew that we had that 1 year mark to survive without an end in sight. But by that 1 year mark, we had to be able to fund the salaries and start getting back on our feet again. So there were a lot of false starts, and we kept trying, but at least we knew we had that buffer, so it wasn't that bad until like we got to December and we're like, we've got only 3 months left. So we kept trying. So once things opened up in Vietnam, for all our markets, all our markets are Southeast Asia. So pre-pandemic, we were in 8 countries in Southeast Asia, not Singapore. So all our countries were very start-stoppy. In Vietnam first opened up, so we went back into Vietnam, and Vietnam was people were traveling a lot every weekend. And then Vietnam locked down after a month. And so we were waiting. We just kept going, okay, they'll open up in another 2 weeks, another 3 weeks. So we were just waiting. And then they opened up again. And then they locked down again. And so we said, okay, let's go into Malaysia, which is one of our markets, which was starting to see signs of opening up again. And Malaysia was also opened and closed 4 times in the period of like 6 months or something. So it was quite bad because, again, everything that you sell then turns into cancellations. And in December, we decided to enter the Singapore market because we thought we cannot keep bleeding like this. Everything that we sell turns into cancellations, and we've had that so many times already. And, you bleed even more money because you're marketing to people and, you sell them a trip, and then after that they cancel. So you're basically spending more money than you have in a very difficult time. So in December, we decided to focus on Singapore because we thought Singapore had the lowest risk of doing the start-stop thing, and that has turned out very well for us.
Yeah, I kind of want to dive into that because for the sake of integrity, I know SEEK Sophie very well, and it's been fascinating to see sort of just how kind of they've had to make a pivot and kind of then really kind of double down on sort of Singapore in many ways. So I just it would be interesting to know a little bit more about that transition, how that took place, and how you're kind of managing that at the moment.
I think which is quite a good topic for this podcast, because the most difficult things about the pivot is the communication of the pivot. Because before COVID, we were very big on, adventurous travel, hikes, dives, safaris, very off the beaten track travel, not in cities. And we had to pivot from international travel to domestic travel, and we realized that domestic travelers, you work hard enough during the week, you don't want to spend your weekend going into a forest and forage and stay in a tent. So domestic travelers travel in a very, very different way from international travelers. So when we first pivoted to Vietnam, we realized that the things that were selling were like very nice weekend trips, which wasn't kind of part of our messaging at all. So if you looked at our messaging before COVID, it was very rough. It was very adventurous, and then as time went on, it started getting nicer and nicer. And then we went to Malaysia, and we went into stays in Malaysia, which we weren't doing at all. And we thought, how do we explain to people that from going on a safari or going on a hike in the jungle in Borneo, we're now selling weekend stays. And so you see people not really responding to that as much at the beginning. And then again in Singapore was completely different. Again, it was a city, and instead of doing things that were outdoors and more adventurous, we're selling a lot of more indoor stuff as well as the outdoor stuff. So workshops, cocktail making, speakeasy experiences. So still more adventurous and more different and more interesting than the usual Universal Studio stuff, but a little bit more difficult to explain to your audience. Like, this is, I know you followed us because you really like hiking and diving, but here's a cool speakeasy. So yeah, we had to navigate all of that, just gradually explaining to the audience, this is our mission, this is what's happening, this is what we're pivoting to, and still staying broadly close to stuff that we would still want to do that's still more interesting and off the beaten path, even if it's in a city context.
And I would say one thing I found very interesting about your brand and your branding is that even within that pivot, I would still feel like, from what I see, that there is still an ethos there that I don't think, when some companies go from one thing to another and you're like, that doesn't look even closely like the same kind of company. One thing I was generally impressed at, and I would like you to talk a little bit more, and this is about kind of some of your digital media stuff and the way you kind of present yourself online, is that I didn't feel a massive, as someone who knows I can't travel, I accept there has to be a change. And therefore, the content I was seeing was like, well, this feels like a natural extension of the things that I probably have to do now in order to keep myself interested, because I can't go and do these kind of great pieces of traveling off the beaten path. And I felt like there wasn't necessarily the biggest disconnect, or I didn't feel like, so I don't know whether I'm blowing smoke up your backside, but anyway, that's how I felt. But I think it's driven a lot by your content, which I've always found over time I've seen it progress, and it's like at a place where I just think it's really fascinating. There's a lot of fun that you have with what you do. So if you could talk about that a little bit more.
I think for the COVID is also a really difficult time for a travel startup to message, because you can't talk about travel as a travel startup, at least at the very beginning parts of COVID when everyone was locked down. So you can't talk about travel. You don't really want to be too depressing because everyone's already sad enough at home. But again, as a travel startup, it's not like things are looking super happy. So it was actually a really interesting time, because I think our storytelling got really a lot sharper during that time, because every single day the news was changing. So every single day our content plan had to change. So, before COVID, we had 3-month plans, 6-month plan, 9-month plans, all of that went out the window to 1-day plan, 2-day plans. So we got very good at, and every day we'll wake up and we'll say, okay, what is relevant to us today? What is relevant to the audience today? How are people feeling today? And what's fresh, what's not been said already by a million other people. So we had to brush up on our instincts quite a lot on what is fresh and what's relevant and how people are feeling. And I think that's really helped us a lot in a post-COVID world where we had to talk about, a different type of experience. But hopefully, like you said, we managed to tap into people's sentiments of, okay, we can't really go that far right now, but what's close to us and what's interesting to us right now. So the challenge always I have for the team is, if you don't find it interesting to you, please do not put it out, because like I do not want to read something that is not interesting, like even to you. Like nobody wants to read it if it's not interesting to the person that puts it out. So a lot of our content is about how we're feeling right now, today. And so our latest content, the things that do very well was, for example, in 2021, when the year turned, there's a lot of like temptation to say, oh yeah, new year, this year will be so much better, it'll be amazing. But actually we woke up in the new year and we thought, this does not feel that different, and we don't see that it's going to be a huge amount different, in the next like 6 months. So that's what we wrote very frankly on our Instagram. We said, don't know about you guys, but we don't feel like this is very different from last year. But we're going to take it baby steps at a time, like how we climb a mountain. And that kind of sentiment resonates very well with our audience, because we're talking to them as their friend, as opposed to a brand trying to sell them this lifestyle, like, yay, this is going to be amazing, you guys are going to do very well. But still in a positive tone of voice, speaking as if we were speaking to a friend, and also something that's interesting to us and relevant to us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that becomes apparent with your brand. One thing that's interested me is you give, like, it can be quite, one of the things that companies do, and having worked in comms for a long time, is as they get older or they grow or they kind of go through time, they actually get less fun. I mean, I think it changes a little bit these days. I think kind of bigger brands have become a little bit more happy to kind of have fun with their brand a little bit. Previously, I think in the 90s, you would have been like, you would have found none of this pre-internet stuff. But like, I think one thing that smacks me about your stuff is that the people doing your social media are definitely having fun with it. And there seems to be a lot of freedom to not go crazy and kind of obviously create content that's like, whoa, why did you guys do that? But they definitely seem to have the freedom to kind of have fun with it. And I think that comes across, like, as a manager and boss and co-founder, it's not always the easiest thing to kind of let the shackles off a little bit for people to have fun and them to feel the freedom to kind of do that. So how do you manage that process? How do you kind of go about that?
I think that's a very interesting point, because I think right now we're very shackled to numbers. So, and as a company, we look at numbers very diligently. So every week, every day, we kind of look at what our social numbers are, and that drives a lot of our content. But at the end of the day, you also need to do stuff that's fresh. So, for example, TikTok has a lot of very like fresh like TikTok challenges. They don't do well on Instagram. People don't like TikTok challenges. They don't like it. So if we're just purely looking at numbers, we would say let's not do it. But you need to figure out, okay, what do we find it interesting? If we find it interesting and it's fresh, let's not care about what the numbers say. So a lot of it comes down to, I guess, creative freedom comes down to, do we find this interesting? Is this work that we're very proud of putting out? And if it is, and we think it's fresh and it's interesting, then let's not be too wedded to the numbers. So I guess it's giving them that freedom. I basically just tell them, look, guys, don't put out stuff that you don't like yourself. But if you put this out and you're genuinely very proud of it, then let's put it out, because, we can take risks on that content. So like one piece of content or two pieces of content might not do very well because we've took risk on it. But as long as we can tell each other, look, this is something that we're genuinely proud of, is a good piece of work, then that's fine. And I think that gives us a lot of creative freedom, because we're always looking at other accounts that we really like and other creatives that we really like, and thinking, oh, they did it this way, and it inspires us to do it that way. And as long as stuff that we really enjoy ourselves. I think that comes back down to the ethos of the company, right? We don't list anything on the platform that we don't want to do ourselves, that we don't find fun ourselves. and we're not going to put stuff on our social media that we think is a dud. So if the team is putting out stuff that they're proud of and doing the experiences that they find interesting, then I hope that it'll come across to the people that we're communicating with.
No, I think that's really interesting, because it's sort of that combination of, like I think any brand, and something that shocks me always as comms agencies often is how little they actually pay attention to data sometimes. That you'll be surprised how data doesn't always drive their kind of decision-making processes. And I think that's I'll probably do a podcast by myself talking about the agency model and why that stifles creativity and all this kind of stuff. But that's a whole different story. But anyway, I think the point is that it's very interesting that you kind of, yes, statistics are incredibly important. They help you find the audience, they help you know what content's right. But also at some point, you've also got to trust in your ethos and your own kind of who you are as a company, and sometimes take chances and kind of lead rather than being waiting to lead. And I think there are just, multiple thousands of examples throughout sort of kind of companies and branding that show that you need to lead as well. Like, you need to kind of trust in yourself a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. The numbers only matter. So for us, when we put out any post, the first question I ask the team is, how many likes do you think this will get? And that's super rough, and it's not a great measure. But what I tell them I want to test is their intuition. And I think intuition when it comes to storytelling and content is the most important thing. So if they tell me that they think something is going to get 300 likes and it only got 200 likes, then I'll say, why was your intuition off? But if they tell me that something will only get 150 likes, for example, because it's a TikTok, it doesn't traditionally do well on Insta, I would say that's absolutely fine. And because they have an intuition around, what kind of creative content will do well and where they want to spend their time. And I think that's the most important thing. So it's not so much about being wedded to the numbers, but whether you understand your audience enough to understand how the numbers are going to show up. Okay.
Is there a particular piece of not just content or campaign or something you guys have done online that you're particularly proud of, or particularly proud of the team?
I think every piece of content is really good. I think the team have gotten very, very sharp with their storytelling, and you can tell because that's the first thing that my friends tell me when I meet them now. They're like, oh, I really like that piece that you did, or I really like your socials now, it's so interesting. So I think every single piece of work, they really put in a lot of effort. I can honestly say we are the company that puts in the most effort into our socials, because every single post takes like at least a day to put together, and you can really see the heart behind it.
Yeah, it often annoys me because I see it and I'm like, God, I wish I had sort of some of that kind of creativity to create posts as interesting and as playful as. And I think if the biggest compliment I could pay is that it kind of makes me want to just find out more. And if I've been given, they call it the kind of permission structure. What you've done is you've created this kind of permission for me to kind of want to come in and dive in more and find out more about either that trip or that kind of, I don't know what your company does. And I think it does a very good job of that.
What's a permission structure?
So permission structure is basically, you often with people, it's like the kind of marketing funnel. You kind of need to create a space, a message, or a reason to kind of get people to kind of want to enter into a conversation or to find out more. It's very hot within the Obama administration in like 2012, and it's something that sort of political parties use quite a lot. Like, so if you think about it, and so this is not obviously relevant to what you do, but like Trump, to get black voters to vote for him, even though his rhetoric up here is pretty pretty racist, they will then do campaigns around maybe kind of black supporters and things like this as a kind of permission structure. And so I find that your content kind of allows or kind of like entices people kind of like me, we're like my demographic, to kind of want to find out more, want to kind of dive in more. And it's a very smart way of doing it.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's good to hear.
Okay.
The one thing I am also very proud of the team of, which I think it's very unusual, is that they have built a really amazing community. So we have influencers that have 3 or 4 times the followers we do, messaging us and saying, look guys, we really believe in your mission and we really want to help like small local businesses as well, so let's work together, and it's for free. And I think in this time, to be able to build that community of people that really care and want to like rally behind that mission, I think that's the success of like the communication of the brand by the team, and I think that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I would say, because I want to ask, as we are moving on with time, because I've got a final big question to ask you, is I think one thing that also underlines is, and I had this discussion in one of our podcasts before, which is how important digital, like social media is. Like, it's something within the industry. It's that people still, it amazes me in 2021, it's like almost seen as, oh my God, I got to do social media. That's so below something that, I want to be the person working on the big PR campaign that gets in the media. Like, I'm like, the value of, say, a newspaper these days is minuscule, unless maybe if it's a public affairs campaign where you're trying to talk to governments, that might be where it still is valuable. But right now, like, it really should be secondary. And I think what you guys do is a reinforcement of the power of why digital almost first these days is absolutely vital, and then other campaigns and kind of traditional media is more of a supplement and a backup to kind of that. So
I think that's a really interesting question, right? Because I think even if you're trying to hire people and you say that, look, you guys are going to do social media, right? Yeah. They'll say, well, that's an intern job, that's not a real job. So I think the perception of social media it's not just in the comms industry, it's more widespread. So it's hard to hire good people to do that as well. And it's also one of those things that is so incredibly hard to track. So we do very detailed tracking. We know exactly, how people move through a funnel, and every single page of our site, how many people drop off, where they come from. But the problem is that socials is not attributable. So even on Google, they mainly will attribute socials to direct organic. And if you look at socials ads, for example, the behavior of most people is that they will see your ad and then they'll Google you. Right. So it's all not trackable. And it then comes down to intuition and gut, right? Yeah. Do you trust this as a medium? Do you think this medium is important? And I don't have the numbers to show you that this medium is super important because the conversion rates are really high and because it drives X amount of orders. But I can, deep in my gut, I know it's important, and it's something that I feel like I want to invest a lot of money in. And I think then the next question to ask is, which social medium do you want to invest in? Because we chose Instagram. Our Facebook presence is basically our Instagram presence because we post everything on both. But there's obviously new platforms like TikTok, which, it's very tempting because it's so easy to get virality on TikTok. So for example, TikTok, we posted a video and within 2 or 3 hours, it got to 50,000 views. Oh, wow. And it took us 1 year for our most viral video on Facebook to reach that amount of views. And so you think, okay, if the whole point of it is notoriety, maybe I should invest in TikTok as well. Another 1 or 2 people to post content on TikTok. And it comes down to what your intuition says, right? Do you think that's a worthy medium? And our guess at this point in time is that's probably not where our target audience is. We think our target audience is still on Insta and Facebook, and that's what we think it's worth spending money on. But we cannot back that up with any numbers. Unfortunately, you just have your feeling to go on.
Fascinating. Okay, so I want to finish on a slightly non-comsy question, but it is a big one. What does travel look like in the future?
I think my instincts are telling me that there's not ever gonna be a pre-COVID world where we can just point a finger at a map and go, I want to go here, or I want to go there, or at least that's not gonna exist for a good part of, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. I don't know, right? I mean, I've been wrong about so much in this COVID period. So, what does a world look like when you can't do that? I think it'll just be, if you look at, I think it'll be very drastically split between the East and the West because of how the government responses are to COVID. And I suspect that you will have the countries that have had a certain attitude towards COVID banding together. So Singapore might be able to go to Taiwan freely, go to New Zealand, Australia freely, Vietnam, but they might not go to Europe in the same frequency, same numbers, or the US. And in Europe and the US, they might travel between themselves, but they might not have the long haul travel in the same way to Asia. So I suspect the world will be a lot more split along those lines. But I hope I'm wrong, because a lot of the places I want to go to are on the other side of the world.
It's hard to see it looking, like you say, the pre-COVID times anywhere, anytime within the next 4 or 5 years, I think is a fair estimation. So that's sad, but I think the best thing is, though, the thing we hope for is to get it under control and kind of take it from there. So there we go. Anyway, like, on a happy no, but I did want to say, like to end it on a more happy note. I do think it is impressive by kind of what you guys have been able to do in terms of your pivot, and kind of how you've kind of taken that on board and kind of worked towards that. And it's not an easy time for the kind of travel industry. And one of the positives is that, and I don't know about other countries, it's a very insular pandemic, because each country is experiencing it in its own way.
Yeah, which makes comms so difficult if you're like a cross-border company.
This message can work here, but we definitely can't be saying that there.
It's so tricky.
And so it brings with it its complications, but it does also mean one thing from my side, and I'm sure other people I've spoke to, is you've kind of experienced a little bit more of Singapore that you may never have done, because you either decide to actually try and live a life and experience it, or you just go, well, I can't wait till I can go to Bali. And I think I know which one I would rather choose, which is, live your life the best you can within the confines of kind of what's happening. And I think there's been travel companies, not just yourself, but other ones you kind of work with here, that have done an amazing job of starting to piece together things that are fascinating, interesting, different stuff I just never thought would happen in Singapore. And, I think that's been hugely impressive, and sort of a mark of resilience and the kind of passion behind a lot of people that do stuff in the industry. So
yeah, the human spirit's cool.
Anyway, I want to thank you, Jacinta, for joining us today. It was fascinating because I think I got, the obviously travel industry stuff is super fascinating, but I actually do think people can take a lot away from the comms stuff you're talking about, and especially kind of the digital media and the way you guys approach that. Anyway, thank you. I was going to say thank you again. Thank you. I hope you had a good time, and make sure you tune in next time. Bye.